Okay, in this video, I want to talk about how Aristotle and his notion of love and the Greeks' notion of love were appropriated again by Christianity. We talked in the other video how the moral framework of habituation and excess and deficiency were appropriated uh, by the Christian tradition, the Catholic tradition, by Thomas Aquinas in particular. And in this, I want to talk about how Thomas Aquinas, again, much later than Aristotle, used Aristotle and his notion of love to describe the Christian life and how it goes beyond Aristotle to some degree, and how I think it's more more accurate to the moral life that we might consider having grown up and been raised in a sort of Christian or Judeo-Christian culture. Okay, so and again, remember, this isn't in Aristotle. This is an appropriation of Aristotle and how it was used by Christianity. Okay, so for Aristotle, there are the moral virtues. Well, for Thomas Aquinas, there are not just the moral virtues, but the theological virtues. And he calls them theological virtues because they have as their object not the good simply, but the good, i.e., God. So the theological virtues, as opposed to the moral virtues, are that the good, that the object aimed at is specifically God. And those theological virtues are faith, hope, and love. And there are three of them: faith, hope, and love. And they add nicely to the four cardinal moral virtues: courage, temperance, prudence, and justice. And then they make seven, as opposed to the seven deadly sins. Right now, but the big difference between the theological and the moral virtues, according to Thomas Aquinas, is they are infused by God. These moral virtues, or these theological virtues, God infuses them in the soul. He infuses a certain habit in the soul, that is to love God. So it's what's said in First John: we love God because He first loved us. We love because He first loved us. And there's an addition to the two we were talking about, eros and philia. We can add to that agape in Greek, which was appropriated by the Christians. It just means love in general, but now it's come to mean this certain type of love for God, an unconditional love that we're supposed to show other people, that we get from God. And a lot of people confuse what's meant by agape. The Latin version of it is caritas, and we get charity from that. And people think charity somehow just means goodwill. It's not just goodwill for Thomas Aquinas, but in fact, it's a higher form of what Aristotle meant by friendship. Charity, Aristotle or Thomas Aquinas says, charity, caritas, agape, is friendship with God. And that's when it's complete. Friendship with God, which involves our emotions, which involves a drive toward unity, which involves a sharing of life, a mutual indwelling, and a sharing of self. And then, because of our love for God, we extend that friendship to other people. So, interestingly, if we're friends with God, and Christ says, I no longer call you servants but friends, and this is John 15, if we're friends with God, we want to be friends with everybody else because of our love for God. We want to love everybody else because of our love for God. This is how Thomas Aquinas sees it. It's our reason for wanting to love other people, even people we don't like, even people who hate us, even our enemies. Okay, and so it's not just goodwill, but it's habit. It's delighting in the other person. It's wanting to be united to people, and so Christianity says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." That means wanting to be friends with everybody, and as strange as that sounds, even your enemies, striving toward union with them. It's beyond simply wishing them well, and that's why it's painful to love in this manner, because most people don't want to be your friend, or at least some people don't want to be your friend, and some people don't want to be united to you, and it's very upsetting when if you're really trying to love everybody and they're not interested in that, and that's the symbol of Christianity, where the person who tries to love everybody is put on a cross. Right? And that's where it will eventually take you, according to the tradition. And there's also so there's elements of this that are similar to Aristotle's friendship, but it's more universalized. That is, we can have this. We should want this kind of friendship with ultimately God, but with everybody else as well. Remember, for Aristotle, it was limited to a few people who were already good enough to be loved. For Aristotle, you only loved people if they were lovable. Here, you desire union with everybody. And one of the elements of this, of friendship and friendship with God, is delight, of course, joy. Just like in Aristotle's friendship, you delight and have joy in the object of love. And you have pleasure in use. I forgot to say that in the last video, but for Aristotle, a good friendship is still pleasant and useful. It's just not the point of the friendship. The same thing with friendship with God. Friendship with God is a joy, and you're united to God, and it wants union with God, and it wants to be one. And there's also this sense of sharing personality or sharing life. There's what Thomas calls mutual indwelling. It's like Christ says, I am in the Father, and the Father is in me, and I in you, and you in me, that we all may be perfectly one. This is what the love of agape, caritas, charity wants, and how it's an extent, how it's a kind of perfecting or a completion or a theological completion of Aristotelian virtue friendship for Aristotle. And there are some interesting implications of this, and I've already said one of them, namely, we want to be friends with everybody, we want to be one with everybody, we want to be united to people, and this wanting to be united to people and friends with everybody is beyond goodwill, and it actually makes us completely happy for Thomas. It makes us ecstatic, that is, outside of ourself. Ecstasy, we said, means bliss, but it comes from the Greek word meaning to stand outside of yourself. When you're out, stasis, stand, you're outside of yourself in love, and you're completely ecstatic. You're completely happy. Okay? And this includes wanting to love your enemies for Aristotle, or for Thomas Aquinas.